Maybe you've done some model conversions with some of your Age of Sigmar models or other fantasy war games, and you just don't play the game anymore. Today we're gonna review one of those situations I have and the units I made for my Elven army. Stay tuned. Alright, welcome to Hedgehog Historicals again. Today we're going to go over a couple units that I've been able to build using the models I made back when I was playing 40k a lot. But I was modeling my Exodites, which are the kind of the elves that decided, or Eldar that decided to flee before the catastrophe. And I'll put a link up here to kind of show you, one of the corners, where if you want to take a look at that army and the models and kind of why I built that, you can go ahead and look at that. But you don't need to know that history to kind of appreciate today's video. I built several models kind of using the Dark Eldar, at the time, Codex, and built it around a unit and equipped them as such. Now, I had to do some conversions, so I had to give them the Age of Sigmar, or sorry, Warhammer Fantasy minis were close combat weapons only, but in the 40k universe they had a pistol, so I kind of did a conversion through a hand crossbow on there. Made a couple other changes. One of the main characters in the 40k universe for Dark Eldar, I completely resculpted her. Not resculpted is too strong a word, but I kind of converted her a little bit to make her less Eldar and more Exodite. And the 9th edition dropped, or 8th edition dropped, and I kind of just put it aside. I stopped playing for a long time. Only now kind of getting back into it, but these models have sat on the shelves for a while, and when Warlords of Erehwon came along, I thought, hey, I could add these to my Elves army. But I needed a unit, so since there wasn't one, I took Rick Priestley's Warlords unit point coster file, and lo and behold, I was able to come up with, turns out, 3 different units, although one of them is not full strength. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I took these models and reimagined them for a fantasy universe. Alright, so these are the models I was talking about. Essentially, all of these models in the back, with the exception of this one, all these were representing witches in the 40k world. And I decided that, of course, doing a conversion to make Exodites, turns out there's 3 groups. There's these 5, which have a dagger and crossbow, or hand crossbow. We've got this one with a sword and hand crossbow. Then we have these 3 which have 2 daggers, one in each hand. Well, the mechanics for that, building a unit of 10, even if that was the sergeant, didn't really fit well with giving some of them a couple daggers and the rest not. It just didn't. It was too messy. So, playing around with a couple different iterations, and I settled on essentially these 6 models with her as essentially the infantry unit that we'll cover in a second. These 3 I decided would be bodyguards for this, what ended up being a warlord. So that's kind of where I went with these, and so we're going to kind of talk about them individually. What I've done in my lore, I'm going to use the terms and names that I've given these models in my army, my lore, my Exodite lore. So you don't feel bound to use these, but I'll put a link in the description below to location on Facebook where you can actually get the download of PDF that has these units in them, so you can play with them if you happen to have something similar, right? So again, because the goal of this video is to kind of show you how I took an existing model and created units and point values with Rick's tool, I'm not going to assume everyone's going to do this, but I'm going to assume you have models that are similarly don't match what's already in the army lists, and you'll want to use I'll give you an example of how I went about creating them in Erehwon, for Erehwon. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 separate units. We're going to use what I call the Moon Maidens, okay, which is going to include her for it sometimes. We've got looking at her as a champion. I'll call her a daughter of Lilith. Lilith being a fantasy elf god, I guess out of the Warhammer universe. I could be mistaken. It could be bigger than that. I'm going to have her. I call her Moonshade, and she is the warlord in this case. And then these 3 became daughters of Lilith, but as bodyguards to her. So let's take the units one at a time, and I'll kind of show you what I did. All right, let's just start with the Moon Maidens in general. And at this stage, I decided that the Sergeant model, daughter Lilith, will not automatically be equipped the way she's shown. So I could always use the model with the banner as a sergeant. If you don't have any other models in your army that actually use banners and have banner rules, I'll have a separate video that kind of talks to how I created a banner and a musician ability or special rule that can be used in most armies. So you can check that out. It's not available yet, but a few months from now, within a few months, it'll be out. Now, so these are the Moon Maidens, and they are armed very simply with the hand crossbow and the knife. Obviously, no armor. They have none whatsoever, and they're going to use the basic stats of an elf. But they need to be a little more fierce, because when you charge with this a dagger has no strength bonus on the charge. No strength bonus in close combat. It does have a strike value 1, so that's good. So these guys aren't going to be hitting very hard or very often compared to units armed with swords. They're not going to survive much either, because they don't have armor, much like many of the other armies do. So that makes this a challenge to make these effective without being an automatic victory point for your opponent for a unit destroyed. So let's take a quick look at the stats and how I hopefully compensated for that. Alright, so I used, as you can see from the profile, I kind of left him with regular elf stats. I did not increase the agility. That is something you can do, but that doesn't really help you in combat. It only helps you in going through terrain. So I didn't feel like it was good to increase that. What I decided to do, though, to increase their combat capability and also keep more in the spirit of the Warhammer 40k, my Exodites, Moon Maidens, and the Warhammer Fantasy Witches, Dark Elf Witches, I figured, okay, I'll give them twice the number of attacks for a regular unit, and give them Frenzied Charge, because that way I could get additional, obviously additional attacks with strike value 1. So I think that it basically helps them hit harder. It won't help them survive longer, but it will help them hit harder. So I felt that was important. Now, the problem is having a unit that doesn't want to stay in combat because it dies too quick or takes too many pins. It makes them a little less useful. So what I decided to do was add the crazed psychotic rule, which is really only normally given to certain dwarf models. But it kind of made sense for what I was doing. Berserk didn't quite make sense because Berserk is, I'm going to call it a temporary rule. As soon as you fail a morale test from close combat, you lose it. And that's not in the spirit of these particular units. So, by using the crazed psychotic rule, they basically always pass a test to charge, as if they roll. So they're always going to be getting having a pin removed when they charge, so, which is always a good thing. You just imagine a one's rolled, so that's fantastic. They also can't be routed as a result of brake tests, which is important because that helps them stick around a little bit longer. Last thing you want is to keep have them running off the field all the time. The really neat thing I think that made sense here is because in the lore their passion for fighting, they're also immune to dread and terror. So that I think helps make them a good unit for going after some of the things like wraiths, who are they need a strike value to really hurt them. Here I've got twice as many attacks now, and I don't have the -1 to hit because of the dread they have. I just think it works with the way I picture these in the lore of both my Exodites and the 6 Warhammer fantasy witches. This kind of I think works pretty well. So that's why I decided to add Crazed Psychotic. So I believe this does not make them too dangerous or overpowered. They are still fragile because, again, they don't have any resistance. They're resistance 5. That's what I decided I would do. So twice the number of attacks, an extra attack on the charge. In the first round of combat, which means they're going to be attacking 3 times each, which is very good. So they'll be able to really strongly whittle down an opponent, even if they take casualties. So, yeah, again, it's not great because they are still only res 5. But, again, you don't want to make overpowered units, and that's exactly what Rick Priestley talks about in his actual rubric. Now, the one thing I decided to do is potentially give them the option to make them vengeful, which actually fits the lore of the witches, and honestly, the lore of my Exodites too, the way I created them. Adding the vengeful rule is, again, it's an option. It allows them to double the number of attacks on the following. First of all, if they win, they have to do follow-on combat. How likely they are to win depends on your dice rolling, really, and what you go up against. But if the enemy is still around, now, after they've gotten in, done some damage, now they do double more attacks. So they're actually doing 4 attacks instead of just the 2 they normally get. So, again, I don't think it's really overpowered. But again, that's just me. So this is how I created them. Now, the one optional upgrade was to upgrade the sergeant with a sword, essentially, for just a point. That's really all you're getting is a +1 to attack. So it's just the Daughter of Lilith sergeant can actually get a sword. That's the only difference. I think, again, I'll let you guys decide, but this is how I went about making this particular unit. So, obviously, in my particular collection, I only have 7 models. I've got the potential Daughter Lilith there with the sword, and then 6 others. So it's not a full-strength unit. I don't think I'm going to make any more, but I still have 3 other models I need to do something with. So let's take a look at what I did with the headquarters unit, if you will. Okay, so there she is in all her glory, Moonshade, with her 2 daggers. And again, being inspired by what I had done with my original Moon Maidens, and the fact Warlords already get extra attacks, I decided that I could actually build up and make her just basically a more powerful Moon Maiden, which makes sense. That's kind of from the lore where they come from. But then, of course, she needed bodyguards, and I figured, well, it's perfect because with her being a 2-dagger fighter, my other 2 or 3 models that have 2 hand weapons would be a perfect fit. So, they're following their leader and, mentor, if you will, learning her combat style, and they're her bodyguard. So, let's take a quick look at the stats that I gave these. We're going to start with Moonshade herself. So obviously she's armed with 2 daggers, just like the Moon Maidens, just like the bodyguards are. And of course, being a warlord, warlords usually have 3 attacks, so I gave her 3 attacks. The only real change I made to her stat line, well, no, they didn't really make a change. She's a regular elf warlord with no armor. Of course, she has tough. I gave her 1 extra attack because of the extra dagger. Of course, she has follow because she's the warlord. And then again, just like with the Moon Maidens, he used Frenzied Charge and Crazed Psychotic with the option for the unit to have Vengeful. So again, they could be a real murder house if they survive their first round of combat. Now, when it comes to her bodyguards, this is where I had to kind of depart. I gave the Moon Maidens originally 2 attacks just to make them a little more viable. But since, just like with the Warlord here, with Moonshade, I took a Warlord's 3 attacks and added 1 for the second dagger. I took the bodyguards 2 attacks from what Moon Maidens had, and because of the second dagger, gave for them a 3rd attack. So hopefully this really bolsters them in close combat. Other than that, they are ablative wounds for the unit. And so I'm considering them Daughters of Lilith, essentially almost elite versions of the Moon Maidens. And the only real options you have in this particular unit entry is to give the Moonshade herself extra wounds or toughness. That's really it. So, 140 points for the base unit with a 36-point upgrade for each of the bodyguards. It's pretty steep, but it's something I can actually play with the models with now. Now, since she is treated as a warlord, I kind of put the special rule in at the top where you can only have one of her, or the Elven Lord, or the Mounted Elven Lord, or the Elven Lord in Chariot. So she counts as the warlord. You can't have another one. So very simple additions to the army list that represent the models. So there's one last unit I want to look at, and that is looking at the Daughter of Lilith as a champion. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so because this particular entry is a champion and not the bodyguard, I decided to kind of stay closer to the Moon Maiden side of the Daughters of Lilith entry than the bodyguard side of the Daughters of Lilith entry. So, in this case, treating her as a hero unit, I decided to start her off just like any other elf champion, and so her stat line is pretty much the same all the way across. Still has no armor, but she has the dagger and hand crossbow of the Daughter of Lilith entry in the Moon Maidens. Okay, so I've got 2 models here showing because there's an option, a weapon option, just like in the original Moon Maidens entry. To the left, obviously, you see there's dagger and crossbow. That's the base. That's how she's kitted out normally. But you can upgrade the dagger to be a sword. Now, like I said, I stayed closer to the Moon Maidens entry for Daughters of Lilith. So let's take a look at the stats for her and what I did with it to make her a champion in her own right. All right. So basically, I took the normal elven hero, left kind of the resistance and everything where it is, but as a 5, just like again, no armor, no sense in making her more than she is. But what I did do, of course, I started her off with a wound and tough 2, like I think most heroes get. But again, she's even better than what she was before, as a sergeant model of a Moon Maiden's crew. Remember, she is the hero, so I gave her an additional attack. So instead of having 2, it's 3. Of course, with Frenzied Charge. There's another attack in the first round of combat. And again, with the option of making her vengeful, she could double that in follow-on combat. So she could be essentially 6-7 attacks, which is a lot of dice for one model. But it could be fun. Other than that, it's just the regular hero upgrades, the additional wound or 2. And it makes her hopefully stand out a little bit longer in battle. Having that reroll will help. Of course, if you're getting hit by halberds, having a resistance roll of 3 or less is not likely. But again, having the reroll option, that'll help every little bit. So whether I choose to use her with her initial kit, and I rarely will, I will most often go with her sword option. That's going to be my hero. So I can actually have 3 units on the table now that represent this particular model set, and I'm really glad about it. I want to save this for last because it is the one thing that's not automatically something that you kind of think of. I did not create the hand crossbow as a separate weapon entry here. Again, sticking with what the elves have, I chose to use the hand crossbow to represent them having spears, basically an exchange of missiles option. Okay, so when you look at a spear versus a dagger, the spear gives you a strike value 1 weapon, no strength bonus, but you have the ability to exchange of missiles. So it really is not much different from a dagger in close combat. Okay, so I didn't think it was a bad thing to use it to treat it like a spear. So when you're thinking in terms of these units, hand crossbow simply equals spears. Now I am working on a dark elf army list where the hand crossbow will be its own weapon. This is not going to be that for my elven list. It'll never be its own weapon. It'll always be considered spears, stand in for spears. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you might take some of your models that you have, whether they're converted or not, and use the point values and the lore to kind of come up with what represents those models best in Warlords of Erehwon. Hope this is helpful to you. Please share, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.